Welcome to another episode of Remember the Great Sports NBA 2K20 roster edits. Today I'm going to show you the roster edits for NBA 2K20. These roster edits will work for any previous NBA 2K game. However, the base rosters on NBA 2K19 and 2K18 are a little bit different. I highly recommend using NBA 2K19 or 2K20 because the creative player options are a little bit easier, and a lot easier I should say, than their previous counterparts from 2K18 and down. Now I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's still a lot easier on the newer games. So I'm just going to show you the base roster of the Portland Trail Blazers all-time team. I really feel that NBA 2K20 did a very, very good job, actually, again, with this roster. They actually added a few players from previous years. So there's really only a couple differences that I've made to the stock roster as compared to the updated roster update. So we're just going to go right through it really quick. This is the stock roster. You got Clyde Drexler, Bill Walton, Damian Lillard, Brandon Roy, LaMarcus Aldridge, Maurice Lucas, Arvydas Sabonis, Terry Porter, Jim Paxson, CJ McCollum, Jerome Kersey, Geoff Petrie, Kiki Vandeweghe, Zach Randolph, and Kevin Duckworth. Now, if you notice something, there seems to be a lot of shooting guards on this team. So with that being said, I actually leave all of those players on the team. However, my first recommendation is changing Clyde Drexler to a small forward. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But the two players that I am going to be deleting are Kevin Duckworth and Zach Randolph. And I am replacing both of them with similar position players, both power forward, center types. So just stay with me, and we'll talk about those new additions to this lineup. Alright, so here is the starting lineup. As you can see, Damian Lillard is the starting point guard. That's a no-doubter. Starting shooting guard is Brandon Roy. Starting small forward is Clyde Drexler. Clyde played shooting guard predominantly throughout his career. However, to fit him in the starting lineup, I feel, if you want Roy in the starting lineup as well, Drexler is a good person to move to small forward, and we'll talk about why here in a second. Also at starting power forward, LaMarcus Aldridge. Starting center, big man Bill Walton. Off of the bench, Maurice Lucas. Now, I think the stock roster actually had Lucas starting ahead of Aldridge. However, I prefer Aldridge in that position. We'll talk about the guy that I'm adding to this roster, and that gives you really good depth at power forward and center. Second, small forward Kiki Vandeweghe. I honestly think that NBA 2K doesn't give this gentleman justice. He is one of the best players to play from that era. So I put him in as the backup shooting small forward. Backup center, the big man Arvydas Sabonis. You could almost argue that he goes ahead of Bill Walton. He was that good. However, Sabonis played the majority of his career after his prime years that he played over in the European leagues and the leagues overseas. So by the time he was in the NBA, we kind of got a former, the end of his career, even though he still was a very formidable player for the Blazers. The backup point guard, Terry Porter, I feel that he's, a very solid backup point guard to Damian Lillard. And this is the first person to add to the roster when you minus Kevin Duckworth, and that is Rasheed Wallace. Wallace is a created player. You can find him through the player DNA profile. This is a younger Rasheed Wallace, 26 years old, where an older Rasheed Wallace would show up on the all-time Pistons roster. This is right in the middle of the prime of his career. He was a very, very good player for a long time in Portland. He can play the power forward, and he can be the backup center. Kind of like LaMarcus Aldridge in the fact that you can put him either the 4 or 5, which makes Kevin Duckworth pretty much expendable because Duckworth backs up Sabonis. So you don't really need 3 centers on this team, especially when you got somebody like Wallace. The backup shooting guard is C.J. McCollum. Honestly, I think you can make an argument for him to be the starting shooting guard. As you can see, for the last 4 seasons, he's averaged over 20 a game. I know that Brandon Roy had a spurt of about a similar amount of time, that he was productive, as you can see here. However, many of you know Brandon Roy got injured and never was the same player again. So you can almost argue that McCollum goes ahead of Roy in the starting rotation, whatever your preference is. Another backup shooting guard, like I said, this team's very thick in shooting guards, is Geoff Petrie. Petrie can also play a little point guard as a backup point guard, but as you can see, he's had some very good years with Portland. Not really sure what happened in 75, 76. I almost think that might be a typo. I don't see how he could drop that much, but maybe he had an injury, so that's why that happened. I don't really know. But I can't imagine a guy playing 72 games and only averaging 1.9 a game. I'm guessing that's probably a typo of some sort on their end. The small forward that's listed on this team is Jerome Kersey. I feel Jerome Kersey is a very formidable player. I just don't know if he needs to be the starting small forward. With that being said, there's not really too many players that can be the starting small forward. There are a lot of guys that were all-time greats of the Portland Trail Blazers, especially either they won their championship. However, I don't know if they're better than Jerome Kersey. Jim Paxson, he's in the same boat as Petrie. He's a shooting guard, point guard. However, I just feel that you can't have both of them, with the bottom half of your roster being filled out with just shooting guards and point guards. So that's why Kersey makes it above Jim Paxson, You could switch Petrie and Paxson out, whatever your preference is. Now, this last guy that I put on the reserve list, and this is another preference thing, you can swap him out with Kersey if that's what you wish to do, and that is Lloyd Neal. Lloyd Neal was an undersized, I don't want to say undersized, but undersized at the time, power forward / center. He was a very important part of the Blazers championship team. He spent about, roughly 6 or 7 years with the Blazers. His number is retired by the Portland franchise, along with a lot of other people that could fill this 13th spot on the roster. There are so many guys off of that team that could be on this roster. It's just whatever your preference is. I felt that Neal was a perfect power forward center type again to back up all those power forwards, essentially replacing the person that we deleted in Kevin Duckworth and Zach Randolph. I put him ahead of Zach Randolph, just because I know Randolph was great, but they were very similar type players, and I felt that Neal needed to be on this team. All right, in closing, the coach is Jack Ramsay. That is the best picture that I could come up with Ramsay. I put the current coach as the assistant coach, Terry Stotts. Jack Ramsay was the coach that was there that brought Portland its championship back in the 70s. I feel that he is the most formidable coach to coach this team. Again, NBA 2K20 has not allowed for updating coaches' profiles, so they just have stock images of coaches. So this is the best that I could do to get Jack Ramsay, even though it doesn't really look like Jack Ramsay. But that's all I had to work with. So hopefully you agree with my roster updates. Again, these are my preferences. You can always check down below in the description at the honorable mentions of players that I did not put in the top 15 on this roster. These are, again, just my recommendations, and you can make your roster however you like to put it. So, hope you enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for the next one. Thanks.